The story begins where a person is fighting hundreds of goblins and slashing through them with his sword under the moonlight. The goblins chase a man as he travels in a carriage towards the kingdom. Just then, the warriors show up and defend him from the goblins by killing them. Later that day, in the evening, the holy knights walk into the city and a man accidentally drops a fruit near Hado's foot. Hado and Memel begin to bully the man and beat him up while claiming he can be beheaded for disrespecting a holy knight. Later, as Fate is getting mocked by holy knights, they are interrupted by Lady Roxy, who stops them, claiming their behavior isn't holy knight worthy and that they should treat him better. She also helps him get up once they leave and offers him words of encouragement while whipping his bleeding eye. Fate heads over to the store to eat some bread. Just then, he sees a few bandits running in the distance and rushes to alert Lady Roxy about it. She leaves him in charge of the standing guard and rushes to finish the bandits. Thereupon, soon as he uses the tip of the flagpole to stab through the chest of the bandit and kill him, a voice claims that his gluttony skill has been activated and appraisal and mind reading have been added to his skills. Lady Roxy returns to check up on Fate, and he is able to hear her thoughts. She thanks him and offers him an opportunity to work at the House of Heart, and he accepts the offer. The next day, while looking for a sword, he comes across a sword, Greed, that speaks to him. Later on, Fate wanders with his sword out in the wilderness. Just then a goblin attempts to attack him, but he uses his sword to slash through and kill the goblin. Fate turns over to see many more hefty and armed goblins. They charge at Fate, but he tactfully takes them down and has multiple gluttony skill activations. Thereupon, the sword tells him they are the same kind and instructs him to keep anyone from finding out his powers, as gluttony is a skill that violates God's principles. Shortly after, Fate bumps into a man dragging a little girl along. The little girl asks him for help, and he follows them into a warehouse. He sees the man terrorize the little girl and threaten to sell her as a slave to the holy knights. Fate watches from hiding, infuriated, as he comes up with a plan to save her. The sister is teaching kids about skills given by Lord Laplace. The kids find it very unfair that the holy knights possess highly valuable skills while some get weak skills. Just then, another sister arrives to inform her that Sahara hasn't been found anywhere around and heads towards the city. Turns out Sahara is being tied up by the goon and crying. As the goon leaves, Fate undoes her shackles, only to notice the man has not left. Thereupon, Fate quickly follows Greed's advice and pushes the boxes over the goon. He then slashes at the goon, cutting through his sword and chest. He then stabs him and questions him about who was behind this kidnapping. The goon reveals it is Hado Valeric. Fate then proceeds to take the girl safely to the sisters. On the way back, Greed tells him about the new skill he has acquired. Later, at a bar, a man talks to the bartender about Lord Mason's demise and how Lady Roxy won't be able to prevent the tyranny of the Holy Knights. The next morning, Fate arrives at the House of Heart and is amazed to see Lady Roxy in a dress. She takes him to her father's grave to introduce him. Fate learns that her father has just passed away 5 days ago and is amazed by her compassion. A week passes and Fate is fairly acquainted with his colleagues and manages to fit in. They, however, wonder why he is hungry right after lunch break. Just then, Miss Haru arrives to call him to meet Milady. Soon, during a conversation, Fate faints and only wakes up to find himself in his room with a note from Roxy asking him to take the next day off. He questions Greed about the changes in his body. Greed tells him that it is a change that comes with his skill and he will crave souls till the very end. If he doesn't kill, he will starve to death. That night, Fate heads out to kill goblins and rid himself of starvation. Just then, he hears the footsteps of a much larger goblin heading towards him. Greed tells him about the goblin's skill to heal wounds, saying it will pose a threat. Fate manages to kill the giant goblin and earns the self-healing skill as well as stats. Greed tells him that he can use his stats to upgrade him and Fate wastes no time in doing that. Later, he is seen practicing his new abilities on the goblins around. Fate stops Roxy at the gate where Roxy tells him that it's her in disguise leaving on a secret inspection. Fate apologizes as he doesn't recognize her and she invites him to accompany her on the journey. The two make their way to the city and Roxy requests him to call her Lexi for the day. Greed teases them and Fate tells him to shut up. Unfortunately, Roxy thinks he is telling her to shut up and apologizes for being annoying. Fate assures that he wasn't saying it to her and they proceed with the inspection. She requests to see his sword, but Fate fears she will know who he really is. They proceed to the market and taste grapes. She accidentally claims they were grown in her own house, which makes the vendor suspicious. Fate, however, covers up for her. Just then, a holy knight arrives and hears Fate's stomach grumble. He goes on to intimidate Fate, but Roxy steps in between. The holy knight almost realizes she is a holy knight, but the two pretend to be a couple and she scolds him for not eating the breakfast prepared by her and apologize. They then proceed to see a vendor selling lucky stones that could possibly have a gem inside. Fate uses his appraisal skill to look into an ore and find it to be a dud. Roxy, however, returns the stone, and they walk away. Roxy then goes on to inquire about an incident from bypasses discussing it, but they recommend she speak to a warrior. Fate takes her to the bar he used to dine at. Thereupon, Roxy gets harassed by a few warriors there, but she teaches them a lesson. They realize she is a holy knight and apologize. After leaving, they run into the Valerics harassing a boy claiming he is under their protection. Roxy frees him from them and they take the boy and feed him delicious food. Unfortunately, they aren't able to find the child's mother and offer to let him stay at her house for the night. Just then the mother approaches them and they hand over the child. Fate is concerned Roxy might see him if she ventures out to fight the monster. The next day, Fate heads over to the market and buys a mask to conceal his identity. He also purchases an ore and gifts her the one with the blue gem she likes. Moreover, the Holy Knights appear to be having a meeting. The warriors are coming across Fate in disguise, standing triumphant over a pile of dead goblin bodies. They name him Corpse before running away. Back at the Heart House, Roxy approaches Fate, asking him to accompany her on a secret mission, and takes him to the Heart family vineyards. There, Roxy goes out with Fate to harvest grapes. Later that evening, Fate sees a girl with red eyes and is also unable to use his appraisal skill on her. She claims to leave the kobolds to him. Just then, Roxy arrives and claims the girl is Galia. Fate confronts her about fighting the kobolds. She reassures him that she will be alright. The next morning, the workers find the vineyards to be destroyed. Roxy, Fate, and a few warriors trace their location and watch from the bushes. They see another stronger kobold, whose level is identified as 50. Returning back to the workers, she promises to defeat the beast and fight it the next day as she makes preparations. The same night, Fate approaches the herd and decides to begin slaying it. He transforms Greed into a bow and begins taking out the lower-level kobolds. Unfortunately, the beast grabs his arrows when shot at, rendering them useless. The beast unleashes a powerful punch, throwing Fate to the ground. Fate pretends to be dead and slashes the other kobold when it has its guard down. Greed informs Fate that he can use his first-level arts if he gives him 10% of his stats. This transforms Greed into a much more powerful weapon, blows through the punches of the kobold beast, and kills it, leaving a huge crater in the ground. Just then, Fate has a stroke after killing a creature of a much higher level than him. The next morning, the warriors arrive at the site to see the kobolds already dead and the huge crater created. Later on, before taking leave, Roxy's mother requests Fate to be by Roxy's side and support her till the end. Later that day, Fate overhears that Hado is joining the hunt for Corpse. He also learns about the Galian expedition. Roxy is assigned to the Galian expedition. Fate requests that she not go, but she has her mind set on the mission. The Valerics celebrate their opportunity to get rid of the Heart family. Shortly after, Fate comes face to face against Hado and the other warriors in their hunt for Corpse. Hado is facing off against Fate where Hado deploys his warriors to attack Fate, but Fate defeats them with ease and the rest run away. Fate then faces Hado. Fate reveals his face and shocks Hado. Hado uses the Holy Sword attack, but Fate dodges it. Fate consults Greed before slicing Hado's sword. Fate then uses his special attack to blow Hado to pieces, leaving only his body. Fate questions him about Roxy's mission. Hado pleads that he will cancel the expedition if his life is spared, but Fate drives a sword through his chest and kills him. Roxy prepares for her trip to Galia and leaves, assuring them that she will meet them in 3 years. Fate also leaves the job at the House of Heart to become a warrior. Haru gives him his pay for the days he worked as well as severance pay before he leaves. Roxy arrives to give a speech to the warriors accompanying her to Galia and meets Miria and Mugen. Rini conducts research on the monsters slain by the corpse. They realize they aren't normal arrow wounds, but instead wounds inflicted by magic arrows cast by the Black Sword. They contemplate the ability of the powers it holds. On his journey, Fate arrives at Tetra City. He inquires to Galia about a ride, but is informed to return the next day. Later, entering a restaurant, he sees a man pleading with the warriors to help with their monster problems, but they end up bullying him. Fate teaches them a lesson and recognizes the man to be Set. He recalls his moments in the village and how Set used to bully him. However, on Set's request, he agrees to help the village fight the monsters. Arriving at the village, Fate is met with animosity from Set's father. His father suggests they'd rather sacrifice Set to the monsters and buy time for more warriors. Set, however, vouches for Fate and takes him home. Set claims to be a changed man after the birth of his daughter and renounces his father's ideas. He tells Fate about the monsters, giving him an idea of how to fight them. Following that, Set's daughter plays with him and offers him candy. Later, when they sit for dinner, Fate abruptly faints. Set questions him about eating anything suspicious. His daughter reveals that she offered him candy given to her by her grandfather. Set is afraid his grandfather is serious about offering Fate as a sacrifice. Monsters are attacking the village, causing destruction of life and property while Fate lies unconscious. Set prepares an antidote, bringing Fate back to consciousness. Fate steps onto the battlefield and takes out the monsters one by one with his scythe. He gains the fireball skill by killing them and now faces the leader. Fate uses the scythe to cut through the leader as well. The next morning, they overlook the extent of the devastation, and Set decides to move to the village. Set asks Fate to punch him to feel even, and Greed insists he does so. While on his way to visit his father's grave, a few goons appear in the path of Fate and threaten to steal everything. Fate steps in between them to fight them, but the driver clings to Fate, not allowing him to fight. Just then, an axe falls from the sky and chases them away. Soon, Maine appears and asks for a ride. They then continue their journey to Galia and they have a conversation. Maine asks for food and ends up eating a lot of Fate's jerky. They finally arrive in Lancaster. Meanwhile, Lord Rudolph is putting up an act of saving a girl from monsters. Moreover, Rudolph executes 2 men for petty reasons. Fate takes Maine to a room and lays her down to rest. Greed reveals that her weapon is also a weapon of mortal sin. He tells him more about the mortal sins. Greed insists Fate improve his strength to resist. That night they go out monster hunting, and Greed insists he fill himself slowly. Fate fights and takes out a sand golem using the fireball skill. He spots another sand golem, but Greed insists he hold on. Maine wakes up and grabs something to eat. She sees the poster claiming to reward the person who takes down the sand golem. He then sees many warriors fighting a much stronger sand golem and heads over to attack it. He eliminates it using the bloody ptarmigan. The warriors appreciate his strength, and he introduces himself as Corpse. Reaching home, he tells Maine that he took down the sand golems, and she is infuriated. They go to collect their reward, and he offers her half of the reward. Just then, Lord Rudolph arrives and commands them to work under him. Maine gets annoyed and sends him flying with one blow of her weapon. Maine is getting upset about a taunt from Fate, causing Sloth to become extremely heavy and crush the wheels of the cart. While the driver mends the wheel, Maine strays off into a village where they meet the village chief, a holy knight. Fate asks him for a place to stay, but the holy knight challenges him to cross swords. Fate engages in a sword fight with the chief but loses. The chief agrees to let him stay at his place if he agrees to train under him. Aaron gives them a place to stay and then proceeds to train Fate. He corrects Fate's stance and posture to help him better utilize his stats. Later, returning to the house, they find the food scattered all around. Later that evening, Fate comes across a picture of Aaron's family. He also sees Aaron looking at the castle. The next day, Fate trains with Aaron and displays a significant improvement in skills. That same night, Aaron tells them about his castle and how he had lost his family to the crown beast while he was away on an expedition. Fate agrees to accompany Aaron in avenging his family while Maine stays back to guard the village. As they enter the premises of the castle, they face an army of skeletons whom they effortlessly defeat. Entering the castle, Aaron's wife and son welcome him back, but soon enough, his son tries to attack him. Aaron is aware that it is an illusion and blocks the attack. Fate intends to kill the others, but Greed brings it to his attention that they will not be slain, as the souls devoured by Gluttony can never pass on. Fate heads out to find the Lick Lord instead. He shoots an arrow at the wall, revealing the Lick Lord. Fate engages in combat with the Lick Lord. Just then, Aaron arrives to assist him. Fate and Aaron combine their grand cross attack and finish off the Lick Lord. Standing in the ruins, Aaron sees the souls of his family and gets a chance to apologize to them. As they share their final hug, the Lick Lord attempts to attack them again, but Fate intercepts it with an arrow. As they exit the place, they find another army of skeletons, but they effortlessly defeat them. Returning, Aaron compensates Maine for waiting and taking care of the village. Thereupon, Maine reveals that she is a phantom and cannot die. Fate and Mine are on their way to Galia after departing from Hassan. While in the carriage, Mine rests her head onto Fate's lap. Soon, Fate inquires as to why she is lying on his lap, and in response, Mine mentions that the floors is too hard. While in a conversation, Mine sleeps suddenly and soon Fate inquires to Greed as to what Mine is fighting for. Meanwhile, Lady Roxy and the warriors arrive at Hassan land. Thereupon, Lady Roxy informs them about Aaron Barbados and the Lick Lord. Just then, Aaron arrives and recognizes Roxy. He tells them about the man who helped them slay the Lick Lord but refuses to give them a name. Aaron learns about Mason's death and offers instructions to help Roxy through Galia. While walking, Fate and Mine reach the place where she was born. She then takes him to a huge cocoon. They decide to engage in combat with the Chimera. Mine strikes the head, and a huge monster emerges with a girl in its chest. A battle erupts, and the Chimera sends a wave of lava behind them. Mine counters it with Sloth. She then goes on to cut off an arm, but it regenerates. Mine chops off its arm once again, but it regenerates and also grows wings. Fate decides to go into starvation mode. They use a combination attack to damage the Chimera heavily. The Chimera creates a huge barrier around it, but Fate identifies the weak spot and cracks it open. The Chimera takes off flying to recover, but Mine uses Sloth to hurl him into the air after the monster. Reaching mid-air, Fate upgrades Greed to a new level. The Chimera creates another barrier, trapping Fate inside with it to incinerate him. Fate quickly attacks the girl and the Chimera to take it down. During this battle, Fate sees a vision of many doctors with children, one of them being the girl and the Chimera, and also Mine. Fate learns that he himself can potentially become a Chimera one day, and requests Mine to kill him if he does. Fate reaches the bulwark between the kingdom and Galia, the Sentinel City, Babylon. Fate and Greed make their way into Babylon. Greed reveals that the weapons of mortal sin are indestructible. Fate sees Roxy arrive at the village and puts on his mask. He also senses the strange presence of a woman in the crowd.